Hi, welcome back to Detective Story. I'm Mike Hammond. Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. I hope everything's good with you guys. Everything's good on this end. Plugging away, and in celebration of our 10th episode, 10 episodes. Doesn't seem like a lot, but boy, it's quite a bit of work. I've enjoyed doing it. I have a friend of mine in New York City who is coming up on 100 episodes, her podcast. It's amazing to me, the sustainability and the amount of work that goes into this. So kudos to everybody out there doing the work, and especially the people out there that are keeping these homicide victims' names alive and the cases alive. It all speaks to me a great deal. So for today's episode, and it's going to be a series of a couple of episodes, I'm going to do what a lot of you have been asking, and I'm going to talk about a case that really gets you into the nuts and bolts of what conducting a homicide investigation is really like. This case, the case of Magdalena Idzikowska, Maggie, as she was called, or as we affectionately referred to her in Area 4, the Polish girl caper, that was kind of my personal opus. It took a total of 15 years of investigation on this case, and one of my partners, who you will hear on this episode, Mike Pietryla, is the son of Polish immigrants himself. We picked up this case. We did not have the scene, which is a bit unusual, but it does happen. We picked up the case several weeks after it occurred. The date of occurrence on this was November 25th of 2001. And we worked on this case for 15 years. And for reference point, I was on the job 22 years again, and I was homicide detective the last 16 years of my career. So it took up a big portion of my career and a big portion of my life. So in these episodes describing Maggie's case, I'm going to be joined by a couple of really cool guests. One of them is my brother-in-law and close friend, Chris Kafcas, who was kind of with me throughout the body of this case and really knows a lot of detail about the case. And he's going to kind of serve as a MC for this. As I'm also joined by one of my partners during the investigation, longtime partner in Area 4 Homicide, Mike Pietryla. Mike, as you'll see, is a fascinating guy, a decorated Vietnam vet, a decorated Chicago police officer, a really special guy, and I'm thrilled to have him on this episode. So I'll let the episode speak for itself. I'll speak to you again at the end of the episodes, and I really hope you enjoy it. This is really the life of a Chicago homicide detective wrapped into a case here. So thank you again. Enjoy it, and I will talk to you soon. I'd like to take a moment from the program to have a real talk about safety and security. Toward that end, I would like to introduce you to my friends over at Blue Knight Security Solutions, your ultimate partner in protection. Blue Knight Security Solutions isn't just your average check your ID at the door security company. They're a team of elite detectives, investigators, and law enforcement professionals with unparalleled expertise. Especially in this realm, I would not vouch for just anyone. I confidently endorse Blue Knight, however, because I've seen and I know their skill sets firsthand. Whether you need their real-world investigative prowess or securing your home, business, synagogue, church, or event, Blue Knight has you covered. From risk assessment to tailored security plans, they'll ensure your safety is priority number one. Please don't get caught in the trap of having the illusion of security. Make sure you are actually making yourself, your loved ones, businesses, and community actually more secure. Blue Knight Security Solutions provides street-smart operators who can handle any situation. Heading out for the evening, worried about your kids heading out safely? Forget the uncertainty of ride shares or cabs. Blue Knight offers secure transportation with trained security operatives who prioritize your safety every step of the way and will get you where you're going with the confidence that you are well protected. Contact Blue Knight Security Solutions today at 773-706-4920 or visit BlueKnightSecuritySolutions.com. That's night like Knights of the Round Table, Blue Knight HomeSecuritySolutions.com. Don't forget to mention my name, and I promise they'll make you feel like family, because your peace of mind matters. Magdalena Idzikowska. On Sunday, November 25th, 2001, employee Israel Gonzalez had opened the Marathon gas station located at 335 North Ogden Avenue on Chicago's near west side, as he did most mornings. It was just after dawn, and a regular customer was already waiting and started chatting with him. It was 44 degrees, but a steady overnight rain and strong winds made it feel bitterly cold. Now, as a reference point, the gas station was located about a mile and a half northwest of the famed the Willis Tower. Sears Tower, really. Israel noted to the customer that he'd seen the green four-door Nissan Altima parked about a half block east of the station, next to a row of tall grain silos at about 1300 West Carroll, and he had recalled the vehicle before and a young woman bringing it into the gas station for service. Israel had expected empty streets on this tough, cold holiday weekend, but now this car, sitting parked by itself, was odd enough to pique his curiosity. And even more curious was the fact that the rear driver's side door was clearly open. At some point, curiosity and concern got the best of both of them, and they began to investigate and walk towards the car. Another factory worker was coming from the other side, and he seemed concerned as well. When they got close, they noticed that there were legs hanging outside of the rear driver's side door. To their horror, they realized that the legs were nude, save a pair of panties and jeans around one ankle. And then when they looked inside, they were stunned at what they saw. Lying face up in the back seat of the Altima was a deceased 21-year-old female. She had been shot multiple times. I don't think they could have articulated it at the time, but what they saw was that she had part of her right hand missing, badly damaged from an apparent defensive effort to stave off the attack. She'd been shot in the stomach, the chest, shoulder, and face, and she had a stippled coup de grace wound visible on the right side of her head. Her attacker had made sure she did not survive the attack. Whether they noticed all of this or not, stunned and shaken, Israel ran back to the gas station and called 911. The victim, Magdalena Idzikowska, or Maggie as she was known to friends and family, was the daughter of Polish immigrants, a sister to a loving young brother, a granddaughter, a niece, and a loyal friend to many. She was a graduate of Chicago's famous Lane Tech High School on the north side. Her future had seemed bright and wide open in front of her, with hopes of moving in with her boyfriend and a new job working with her mother at a medical center. How then, 2 days after Thanksgiving, 2001, does that future, so bright and so open, get stripped from her so horribly? How does the life of this young woman end alone and violently on a desolate side street in Chicago? Detective Mike Pietryla, a son of Polish immigrants himself, along with myself, Detective Sam Manto, and the ubiquitous tank commander, would spend the next 15 years getting answers and resolution to the case. This is the story of Magdalena Idzikowska. So today I have with me my brother and close friend, Chris Kafcas, who's a Chicago legend and bar owner. I'll let him decide whether he wants to try and sell his bar or not, which is all good with me. But he knows the city really well, and he was close at hand with me during this, what turned out to be 15-year investigation. Also joining me, close friend, homicide partner, longtime partner, excellent homicide detective, decorated U.S. Army Vietnam veteran, and decorated Chicago police officer, Mike Pietryla. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you joining. So I'm going to let Chris, who knows this case pretty well, walk us through it, and we'll kind of fill you in on the homicide of Magdalena Idzikowska and how we came to a conclusion on it. Chris, take it away.
What an honor to be here between the two mics. So on November 25th, 2001, the body of Magdalena Idzikowska was discovered in the backseat of a car on a side street of Chicago. Mike, why don't you tell me how you came to be involved in the case? Because I think the case comes through you, correct?
Yes, it does. My lieutenant in Homicide in Area 4 called me in the office and said that this case had been sitting for a little bit. Would I mind taking it? And I did. And he said he especially picked on me because the girl was from Poland, and I'm Polish descent, and I have a lot of background in how Polish families are. And so that's how it was assigned to me. After it was assigned to me, I went to Mike Hammond and other detectives, our other partners, and kind of explained that after reading the case a little bit, we determined to start fresh all over, since there was things this happened the day before and the scene had been already dismantled and body had been removed. So we kind of had to start fresh on this whole case.
So you're starting the investigation without actually being on the scene of the homicide.
That's correct.
Criminal sexual assault and homicide, as it turns out.
That's correct. And it's unusual that happens, but sometimes it was extremely busy back in those years. We had hundreds and hundreds of murders coming in, so it was very busy, and you can't ignore the ones that are coming in, even if you're working on other ones at the same time. I
think it's important for people that aren't familiar with a homicide investigation at all, and even some that are. What exactly happens at this point then? You're taking on a case without access to the crime scene. It's not like it's on TV where you get to go out and take a look at everything. What information are you given to begin your investigation, and in what form?
Well, initially, when we pick up a case like this, you'll get the original case report, and that's the actual blue and white cars that go out to do the scene. Patrolman. I'm sorry. And we'll get that report, and then they call the detective division, and the detectives will come out. The original detectives, they generally call them scene detectives that come out and process the scene. Sometimes they continue with those investigations, but in this case, they didn't. So we read those reports, and then we form a game plan, so to speak, what to do. Basically, in this case, we decided to go out to the scene, whether or not anything was still there. There was no evidence there or anything, but we went out to familiarize ourselves what streets they are, what directions, and everything. We take it all in at the beginning. So we start there. And sometimes we find additional things to be investigated that a scene detective might have missed. And then we proceed to go with a game plan after that.
Was there anything that stood out to you guys when you went out to the scene?
In this case, it actually did, because when we went out to the scene, since the vehicle had been removed and the body was removed, there was nothing really there left. But we did notice a little bit of glass at that area that was still on the pavement. But then we did a canvass to see if any cameras were around. So we looked around, and we found a camera that could possibly have captured some of this information. And it even though the end result of the content of the video didn't help us much, there were certain things in there that showed us that a vehicle did not move.
Right. So that becomes an important piece later on down the road. So you guys you've been out to the scene. What other information do you have that you guys are looking at to begin the investigation?
Well, so the thing is that, I think the question will come up for some of our listeners probably is, how does it work that the scene detectives don't follow up, right? Well, in a city like Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, as Mike mentioned, we're busy all the time. And mostly it doesn't happen, right? Most of the time you do, if it's your scene, you do have it. But occasionally what happens is you do a scene homicide where most people know the first 48, right? And you got to get all that stuff done. You do all that and you document it, but then maybe you catch another case, or occasionally, like, you go on vacation, or you got multiple cases, or in the case of Geneva Redding, which was my first episode, we caught that case on the scene because the original two detectives assigned, when we get to the scene, they had a fugitive that they'd been looking on for an old murder who got picked up, and they had to go take care of. So it just happens sometimes that the scene detectives don't get the opportunity to follow up, and then it's assigned to somebody else if they can get. You don't want to let it go too far. Our lieutenant at that time was an incredibly sharp man, and I think he saw several things with this. One, it was a case that needed addressed. The two scene guys were just not going to be able to do it. They were too tied up. And also there was the as how odd it sounds or whatever, that ethnic connection is important because Mike, he knew the Polish community. And like a lot of immigrant communities, is tight-knit community, and he was able to converse in there. So that's how that kind of happens, just so that's explained. And then kind of what we do, as Mike talked about, the first thing you want to do is talk to the scene detectives and get a feel from them what they looked at, what they saw, because we don't have the benefit of the scene. And then you start to, we kind of go back and redo everything, as Mike said. And it one of the things that struck us that we had great hope for was that video camera. And the reason the guys on the scene just didn't get it, first of all, that day was rainy and pretty nasty, and it was quite a ways down, and it was hidden. But
almost a city block.
Almost a complete city block. In the city of Chicago, it's a long way. And but it was facing a way where we thought this should capture something for us. Ultimately, it did, which we'll explain later, but not enough to be really probative, meaning, enough to have any evidence to help us in court. So then we start the process of how we would do an investigation, and everybody's style is different. But Mike and I and our other part, we had two other guys kind of working with us on and off at the time, Sam Manto and our friend, the tank commander. He's still working, so give him a break and leave his name out. But and we just toss this around. Okay, how are we going to go about this? What are the important things to do?
So in catching this case, you guys are given the initial report, and I'm guessing the crime scene photos.
Yes.
And
correct.
The crime scene photos were comprehensive?
Yeah, they were good. The two forensic we used to have, and boy, do we miss these days, right? We used to have forensic investigators, which are like the crime lab personnel that came out, who had the rank. I think they had a rank of sergeant, didn't they? Or
they paid them out of grade. They got sergeant's pay for
but they weren't assigned that position.
But they were forensic investigators.
They were really professional. And then we had evidence technicians, who also could be very good, but they would do like the burglaries, or you want to inventory a gun and have it fingerprinted, kind of things that were less. That's not fair to say, but there weren't homicides or police shootings or something that really were critical. And those forensic investigators of crime lab, not to a person, but largely as a group, were very, very good at what they did. In this case, they did a pretty nice job. The scene photos were pretty comprehensive.
Yes, we used those crime scene photos a lot more. That produced leads for us, more things for us to pursue, to try to find out who did this.
What were your first impressions looking at those crime scene photos?
It was horrendous. The girl was brutally murdered, and she was found nude. So we assumed that at that point, even though we couldn't confirm it, that she was raped or had sex and then was murdered. But they were very graphic. She was shot 8 times, something like that, 8, 9 times. And it was just terrible to see.
Yeah. I know from a multitude of conversations that there was one wound in particular that just kind of showed you the brutality of the crime, and that was the
well, yeah, there were actually a couple, right?
Yeah.
I think that one day Mike and I have talked about this over the years. There are two. So the way this happens, she has a 4-door Nissan Altima, right? And she's in the back seat on the driver's side, and the door is open and her legs are hanging out, and she was nude except she had her jeans and panties around her right ankle. She also had a bruise right on her shin, right where the door would have contacted, right? Which just didn't mean anything at the time to us, but we did take note of it. And then the nature of the gunshots were such that some were at an angle and then some were directly on. So we kind of made the assumption that the killer shot his way into her because she's leaning back. But the brutality of the wounds were, I mean, she was shot multiple times kind of up into her chest, but she had a contact wound against her head, kind of a coup de grace wound. And most troubling, I think, that will always kind of stay with me was she had has to be a defensive wound to her right hand, and a big chunk of her right hand was missing. And that's, very frankly, I know it's difficult always for the family to hear, but that's a defensive one. Her begging, she knows it's about over and begging for help. That's hard to get past, even for guys. I mean, this guy's a hardened Vietnam vet, right? I mean, and I've seen hundreds and hundreds of murders. Things like that stick with you, right?
Yeah. Yes, it
Can't
does.
imagine.
Yeah.
So you guys are looking at these crime scene photos. You've been out to the crime scene, and you're formulating a plan. What are the first steps that you take to begin the process of this investigation? What are you focusing on? Like you've been given this.
Well, we knew two things, right, that were going to be critical. From the autopsy, the vaginal swabs that had tested positive for sperm in both her rectum and her vagina, and so that DNA was going to be critical. We felt,
Right.
DNA is always strong evidence when you have it. It's only conclusive when you can tie the rest of the case to it, but it's an important piece of evidence. The other thing that we knew pretty quickly from talking to the original detectives was that she had made a phone call from her home phone in her apartment where she lived with her parents at 11:20 p.m. at night. So it would have been on the 24th. And that phone call lasted about 20 minutes till 11:40. And then the one thing that the video did help us with was we know she arrived on the scene right at midnight. So 20 minutes after the phone call. So that phone that she called, we had a feeling was going to be another piece of evidence we had to deal with.
The immediate suspicion then is that the last person she talked to is probably the last person that saw her and may be the one that committed that.
It's certainly, we want to identify that person and talk to him. That's for sure, to find out whoever that was.
Right. If it's not the killer, we might know where she had gone.
Right.
Or what she was doing. Right.
Right. What are the next steps that you take? What do you begin to focus on at that point?
Well, we're going to check everything that's on there. We have to talk to mom, interview mom, brother, father, friends at work, anybody she's associated with at all. And generally we got a lot of that information from the mother. Where she worked, and then we go to where she was employed and find out who her friends were there and speak with them. And this is all just gathering information at this point. We're just trying to gather and tie something to the homicide. And as it turned out, we did eventually do that. But
so what you're doing, Mike's describing there, those are kind of broad strokes, right? What you're trying to do initially is re-talk to everybody to see if anything jumps out obviously. Because sometimes, in some cases, the family or somebody will tell you, oh, yeah, this guy had been threatening her. Right. Mm-hmm. She was really afraid of this person. So you're painting in kind of broad strokes to see if there's something obvious you need to go at right away. And then absent that, which we didn't really have in that case, then you start to kind of break it down and, okay, what direction are we going to take this?
And I know from conversations over the many years with Mike, that you guys are at this point, you're also starting to begin a process of elimination, right? You're trying to, at the same time that you're building a time frame, you're also going to start trying to remove people as possible suspects. That's correct.
And that's what I meant to say, is that we're going to gather as much information as we possibly can, and then we'll dissect that, and then we eliminate people.
Right.
And that's the best way of describing it. And sometimes you'll just left with nothing. You can eliminate everybody you talk to, and then it may go to cold case, which both Mike and I have worked at. But it's a process like that. And
I don't know, Mike, is it good to note that at this early stage of the investigation, you guys have pieces of evidence that over the extended period of time, 9 years of the investigation, correct? From the beginning of the investigation to the
6 years. but basically, well, let's see. Look at my notes here. Yeah, I mean, it was 4 or 5 years to identify the suspect, and then another couple of years to tie him strongly enough where we were able to get him charged. Then 3 years before the trial came up. So, and then we can get into this later, but it was actually reversed by an appellate court on a technicality. We had to try it again. So it was 15 years of this case.
Right.
And I mean, except for post-trial, which then we don't really have any law involvement. But for that first 9 years, this was not a cold case. This was a case that whenever we had extra time in between the other multiple murders we were working on, that we were actively. This case never really went cold in terms of how you define a cold case.
Right, right.
It's run out of, because we had multiple things we had to accomplish. And I mean, the biggest thing was the DNA, and we always knew that was an issue. And it was complicated with Maggie because her name was Magdalena, but everybody called her Maggie. What complicated a little bit with Maggie, she was a very popular young lady. She's 21 years old. She loved
to socialize.
Yeah, she was out socializing like a lot of 21-year-olds. So she had a lot of people that she knew, not particularly a lot of sexual partners, but we couldn't assume that we had to talk to everybody.
Right.
Any male that we talked to, we asked them for a buccal swab, which is a DNA standard, and then even the women that she was friends with, girlfriends, cousins, we needed to talk to them to see, what they might be able to tell us. But that was an exhaustive list. There's no exaggeration. We probably took a minimum of a dozen buccal swabs.
There was a lot, yeah.
And maybe more. And you're talking about each one of those as a period of weeks or months to identify, locate, talk to them. One guy was in Nashville, Tennessee. We went down there. I mean, so it was just years of that. And each one, the buccal swab comes back, the DNA test comes back negative. You're like, okay, if other circumstances don't put them there, or they're telling you a story that makes sense, they're not a suspect. We joke after a while. I mean, it's just the gallows humor that you get. Like you'd find somebody and you go interview them, and if you ask them, hey, do you mind giving us DNA swab? And they said, no, of course not.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to. It's like, well, he probably didn't kill her. You know what I mean? Right. So that was the process for early on and for years.
For years. And at the same time, you're trying to establish a timeline of what she did in the days prior to her murder, correct?
Yeah, that takes time to do that too. Yeah. Just for that particular, just even for one day to timeline somebody, and that means where were you from this time to this time, and we're doing it for 24 hours,
right,
around the clock. It's very extensive. It's hard to do. Unless she has a job, and then you have to interview the people at the job, say, yeah, she was here for 8.5 hours. She punched in at this time, punched out at that time. Then we're using other methods to determine where she was at the time. Phone records, they'll give you a time that she was on the phone and who she called or who she got a call from.
This is 2001. I got to think that it's not like on TV where you request the phone records and like you get an email like a little while later. How long did it take? Like 6 months to get those phone records?
It was just starting to, like our narcotics guys and that were really just starting to build like phone trees, right? Which like 5, 6 or 7, like by the time we get this guy identified and charged.
This is the era of the Nokia flip phone.
Right.
Right.
I mean, by that time, we could have given them all these phone records and they could have plugged this in and given us a beautiful tree. But at the time we're doing this, that really didn't exist yet. So what we're having to do is, the phone, I guess we kind of skipped over this, but just to hit it now, the phone that she called from her house phone turned out to be what we call a burnout phone. Meaning that's a term that's used kind of on the street as a phone that's used opened under a false identity, so that like drug dealers, criminals, whatever, can use it and not be tied to them, right? And so that particular phone, when we got the phone records back, was tied to a woman by the name of Helen Wright. And Miss Wright, we talked to, was a very nice woman, but she was like in her 70s. She lived on the west side, 4800 block of one of those streets out there near Chicago Avenue and Cicero. But she told us that, and it was backed up by a police report, that she had, like, within a few days of that phone being opened, her purse had been stolen. And so then we did a little follow-up, and we found out that there was a phone shop, cell phone store, which used to be really common all over the place, at Cicero in Ohio, which is owned by infamous
character,
West Side gangbanger by the
Chicago
name
character,
Willie Lloyd. Yeah, Willie Lloyd's since met us in, but so somebody used her IDs to open this phone, right? And so now we have to go through the very arduous process of trying to figure out who had that phone. The only way to do that is to get the phone records, the muds and tolls, and look at it. And each one, try and find patterns, like, okay, call this number multiple times. Who's that phone? Order those phone records ad nauseum, right?
Right.
And it just goes, and then you're trying to build this, pattern of calls.
So now you have this mystery phone number, right, to a burner phone. You have DNA evidence to a mystery suspect. Is there any other physical evidence that you guys have at this point that can lead you?
Not really. I mean, we had shell casings. She was killed with a .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun. So there was
no gun, but we have the casings. But the casings generally, when a casing is discharged in a gun, you have to load a magazine or physically put in bullets into a revolver. You would think there'd be fingerprints on it. But what happens when the explosion happens, because that's what happens when you fire a gun, it burns off on the shell casing any oils or things like that. So it's rare that they get even they call it a partial print off of a shell casing. So we didn't have that. We did also have the film that we retrieved from the building that became important to a certain amount. But at that time, that was about it.
Right.
As far as physical evidence is concerned.
Yeah. And the crime scene photos presented a lot of questions for us. I mean, it's no exaggeration. I just don't know how many hours we stared at those crime scene photos, which is tough. It's harsh, you know what I mean? But you got to separate yourself out. And they're asking yourself, we're missing something, right? Yep. We're missing something.
Or it's here and we're just not looking at it, or we're not seeing it.
We're passing it back and forth, looking at him over and over and over.
She was dating someone at the time, right?
Yes.
But you were able to rule him out relatively quickly?
Yeah, I mean, in the day or so after the murder, the detectives at the scene did a nice job of finding him. He had an alibi for that night.
He was cooperative.
He was cooperative. He submitted a buccal swab, which didn't match the DNA inside of her. So, he was not a strong suspect. In general, you have to kind of look at the boyfriend, husband, whatever in these cases. But he had a good alibi. But we still followed up on that because again, it's ours now. We're taking a look. I mean, we talked to his supervisor, who had no vested interest, and he backed his alibi. We actually drove to
the suburbs.
Yeah, from his place of work to the scene to see if it was possible, and it just all of that basically cleared it. You know what I mean?
So with the phone records, I mean, this is just mind blowing to me. With the phone records and the DNA evidence, that process of eliminating people through the DNA evidence and trying to hone in on that mystery phone number, going through all the other phone calls that she had made, text messages she may have received. We're talking about a period of years, not months at this point, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure, because it was just...
it's very extensive. And most of it, we submit, and most of it is we're waiting for results.
Right.
A lot of it. DNA, you wait for their results. You submit it, you may not get it back for 6 months.
Right.
Same with phone records. The phone records, when we order them, we go to the carriers. Everybody doesn't have the same AT&T phone or Verizon phone. So somebody's got AT&T or one has Verizon. Each one of those companies, that's the last thing that's going to get done when you put in a subpoena to get muds and tolls on these people. Plus, once you do get them, you have to check the numbers that they're coming back with, and then you have to interview those people if it's all within that time frame of a day or so before.
Right. I mean, you're talking about, Mike, and this is what's like just mind blowing to me. You're talking about a tremendous amount of mundane work.
Yes.
It really is. And the thing about it, too, that you always have to be cognizant of, and we worry, it's each one of those people that you go talk to on phone records. All right, our burner phone called this number 3 times, right? So let's go talk to them, see if they recognize that number. You can't just go, it's foolish to go to them and say, we're investigating this murder. Do you know anybody? Because you don't know if they're the murderer or if they're murder's part of the family.
Right.
And so you got to kind of find an angle to kind of get them to say, hey, you remember this phone at this time? Do you have anybody? So there's always a myriad of ways that we approach that to try and not. Now, a lot of times you're just not fooling anybody. You know, they know, like, those guys are homicide.
Right.
You're not really.
We're trying to tap dance.
Those guys are not interested in a identity theft. You know, they're looking at murder, but you still got to kind of try and walk that line. Get people to talk
there is a piece of the crime scene that you couldn't know it at the time, but gets submitted that has a tremendous impact on the case, at least on the time frame of the case, right? And that would be her clothing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So at some point in around 2003, 2004, right, Mike and I know we got the results back in 2004.
Correct.
So 3 years later, but sometime in that time period, among the other things that we're looking at, like, we needed to kind of, in some way, confirm that she had had sex in the backseat of her car, even though it seemed obvious. We can't assume things are obvious like that. So we realized that her panties and her jeans had not been submitted for testing, and so we did that. And in June of 2004, we received notification that her panties and jeans tested negative. There was no sperm on there, which stronger solidified the fact that she likely had sex there on the scene, you know.
As opposed to somewhere else.
Well, if she had sex someplace else, anywhere that day, something most likely would have seeped out onto her undergarments. Mm-hmm. And based on the fact that the way we found her, based on the fact that the pants and the underwear did not have any DNA on them or sperm DNA, we jump to the assumption anyway that she had sex in that car.
Right.
So whoever she had sex with in that car was most likely.
Right.
Yeah, it kind of solidified what seemed obvious.
Yes.
Right? I mean, each step of that kind of solidified, which it seems a little redundant, but it's just the things you have to do to get answers to make sure you're solidifying the strength of what you hope will be a prosecution at some point.
Not to use an overused cliche, but at this point, you're taking small pieces of a puzzle and putting them together to try and create a larger picture.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's like taking a puzzle, throwing it against the wall, and now putting it back together.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other thing, too, that the crime scene photos did a lot for us. I mean, this turned out to be frustrating, but it gave us a really good picture of what. One day, Mike and I were looking at the crime scene photos, and in the back seat of her car, in the photos after her body had been taken, was the window of the door that was open. So when they get the outcry witnesses, which were the guys, I think we kind of glossed over this, but she's found that morning of the 25th, about 9 a.m., in the backseat of a car, as we described, right? Well, she's found there's some workers, a worker and a customer from a gas station right down the street who had seen the car there earlier. And the guy working there recognized it. Like, I've worked on that car before. I think I know the girl that owns that car. But they didn't really think too much about it. And there was a guy working in a factory who come walking by and saw the door open. And then they kind of converged together and they saw this terrific scene and they were like, shit, you know, they call 911, they back off, right? So the door that her legs are hanging out of, that window is broken out. Like you can see in the crime scene photos. But as we look at him closer, we see that later, the crime lab guys took the window, which if you look at the crime scene photos, which struck me as odd, I asked Mike, explain this to me, because the door was open, right? But the window from that door was like 2 feet towards the front of the car, in front of the door, lying on the ground, pretty much intact. Like, and I kept looking at it, and I said, how could this be? How did the window fly out like that?
How did it get out of the
And then we looked at the crime scene. Mike's like, well, look at this photo, and now her body's been taken out, and the window, the crime lab guys must have taken the window and placed it in the seat where she was at to be taken with the car, right? And it's intact in the back seat. So Mike's like, he checks. I don't know if you called, you checked online, and you must have checked the computer, and then called, and the car was still at, this is months later. Right?
Months later. Still impounded.
It was still impounded. So Mike and I drove to the impound, and sure enough, there's a car, weather's taking a toll on, it's been a while, but the window is there, and we realized the reason it's still intact, it has like window tint film on it, which kind of kept it, but it's shattered. It's all in little pieces, but It's still attached to that window film. And in doing that, you can tell what's the outside of the window and what's the inside, because, of course, the film's on the inside. Right. And it's clear then that there's a bullet hole outside to inside.
Correct.
And Mike's like, well, if that's true, and think about she's got the wound on her leg, like, it seems likely, I don't know which of us came up with this hypothesis, but it seems likely the guy, she probably tries to grab the door, knows bad something's going to happen, tries to close it, or the guy grabs the door and leans on it, whatever, causing that bruise, very likely right where the door would hit. Right. Again, we're making assumptions here. We're trying to figure this out. But then he shoots through at her, shoots through the window. We know that's true now based on this. And likely grabs the door
frame,
flings the door open, right? Which now the window's shattered, but intact. And when he flings it open, maybe the stop of the door causes it to fly out 2 or 3 feet and land on the ground, right? So again, like we're making this kind of extrapolation, but now, okay, that makes sense. Well, if that makes sense, how can there not be a fingerprint? There, right? So we called an evidence technician. The guy was great. He came out and met us and everything. And I swear to you, we're standing there, and this guy pulls a thumbprint right where, like me or Mike, where Mike's 6'2", right? I'm 5'10". I got big hands, like right where one of us would grab the door to fling it open. He finds a print like the size of my thumb, and it looked.
Yeah, just from his powder, we could see it.
Right.
And when he when he lifted it, we were looking at it. We go, this just looks like a very good print to me.
And we're like, holy shit, man, this is helpful.
Yeah.
But that fingerprint, man, was a heartbreaker. We sent it to Illinois State Police Crime Lab, and they notified me like it's too smudged to get any points.
Yeah.
So another just dead end.
And I was so frustrated about it. No shade on the State Police Crime Lab; they do a great job. But I'm like. I looked at that freaking fingerprint, but the problem is it's really difficult. You can't always just tell by looking at it. They have to put it under a microscope to be able to get the number of points they need to make identification.
Yeah, what is it? I don't know, 14 points or something they need like to make a positive identification. I think they had 7, something like that, or
so
wasn't enough.
In typical Mike Hammond fashion, I'm just won't let shit go. I read an article. Like we're in England, if you had a suspect, they could compare him with less than, call him 12 points or whatever. They could say with some likelihood it probably is, right? So I get that print back. I call the FBI and I say, hey, is this true? I read it. And they said, it is true, but, you need a suspect, but send it to us, So I sent it to the FBI. And then the FBI said, yeah, we're sorry, but we can't get any points out of it. It's just too smudged, And I'm just like, are we going to get a break on this or no?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it was. But what that did do, though, it did start to explain to us how it went down.
Yeah, it made sense then. Yeah, even though by looking at the initial scene, when the pictures and everything, we had a pretty good idea based on our experience. That's just an idea. Doesn't hold up in court. You need facts. You got to prove it, and that's what we did. And this fell in line with the way we were looking at this. Still had no idea who did this, but we may have part of an idea of motive. The number of shots, the coup de grace in the head, people that are angry do stuff like that.
Right.
Then her leg, she was naked. She either had consensual sex or was raped, but something happened where her legs were still out and an argument ensued. And this door had, how do you account for that? The bruising on her leg. And then they find the gunshot, the window. And it just moves our investigation along. We're still not looking at anybody at this point.
Right.
And still waiting for results on things.
Yeah, I read another article in England again. The Scotland Yard, I guess, can do amazing shit. But where they got a fingerprint off a spent shell casing, which Mike says is very difficult
Rare
to do because of the heat produced when a thing is fired. So I contacted state police and I said, I'm going to request that you fingerprint these. And they're like, no, forget about it. You're not going to get any print. And I said, no, it's not true. You can, because here they did it in England. And by this time, they're like, I don't give a shit.
Who the fuck is this guy up in Chicago?
But then again, in England, you can't have a gun, right? Nobody carries them, even the bobbies.
I went up the chain with that. Like, here, look, I got this article can be done. And in the end, they're like, it's so unlikely. And also, we get something like 100,000 show casings a year. If we start doing this, it's never ending. Right. You get something more definitive, we'll consider it. Until then, I'm like, okay, fine. But that just to tell you, like, we're grasping.
You got told by the state police, if I let you chew gum, everybody's going to want to chew gum.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Again, no shade on them. I mean, we put a lot of heat pressure on them to do a lot of work, right? And so, but it's just like I'm kind of illustrates how. We're going to find something.
Yeah.
Damn it,
I mean, at this point, you guys are looking at, you're going to grab everything you can grab to try and get as much information as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So what do you do next? You've got a thumbprint that's smudged.
Right.
You've got a mystery phone record.
Right.
And
what the turning point, I think it's fair to say, Mike, was like, we ran out of people to buckle swap.
Mm-hmm.
Right. At some point, there was one guy we were looking for who had a relationship with her that had gone bad. And we really were trying to locate him. And we thought, maybe this is our guy, he threatened her, maybe. They hadn't been together for a while, but, and we found him, and he was cooperative, and we did date, but I hadn't seen that. And he gave us the buckle swab. Once again, we're like,
we're waiting for the guy to say, get a warrant.
Right. So
everybody you're running into is cooperating.
Pretty well cooperative. And so I think we ran out of people to take DNA samples from, right? Now, it was a kind of a turning point, right? Because we're like, okay, now the phone records, right? We got nothing else. And we got to tie down the phone records.
Talk about mundane work. That's mundane work, chasing down phone records.
Time consuming. And the thing about this is, too, not to cry the blues or to say, because everybody in the city of Chicago and probably New York City and Los Angeles and Houston and everybody else that's beset by the kind of violence we are, a homicide detective, it's not like, okay, we're going to lock this down and we're going to work it until, no, it doesn't work that way. No. Because, hey, our sergeant come out and say, where are you guys at? It became known affectionately as the Polish girl murder because everybody was like, knew we were just like wearing this out. And a sergeant would come out and say, and we had good bosses, great people to work for, but they'd come out and they'd see us out there, Hammond, Pietryla, Manto, where are you guys at with the Polish crew? And we're like, well, we got this, and they'd be like, well, so you're nowhere. I got a new one, go handle it, right? I mean, I got nobody else, go take care of it. And now that one, maybe you got somebody in custody, or that one's you solve for, so now you're weeks, months maybe, like, all right, let's get back to Maggie, and
which I think is I think it just speaks to a dogged sense of purpose, you know? I mean, Mike, you're going through this amongst all the cases that you guys both have, but in the back of your minds is this unsolved rape and murder of Magdalena Idzikowska that you guys are just not giving up on. What was your motivation to just not move this into cold case, to just call it?
Well, because we're still waiting on results of things, and the girl didn't. If we could show your viewers the crime scene photos, that would tell anybody, take a look. This is somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, and she was brutally murdered and raped. That's the way I was leaning anyway. She didn't deserve this, and that's just the way we were taught also. We were taught by very excellent detectives, and we had excellent bosses that you don't just drop it. That's the motivation. And it's a mystery. It bugs you. You can't figure this out, and we got to be missing something.
Right.
And that's true with a lot of cases. You know what I mean? Like, where the difference with this one, as Mike pointed out, was it never quite came to a natural stop. Right? Because there was always still things to do.
Right.
And what happens a lot of times with other cases that, like when I worked in cold case, you can see there becomes a natural break point where, like, unless we get something that shakes, we've done all we can do. Right. And, and with Maggie's case, that, as amazing as it was over that course of that much time, there never became that natural break where we're just out of things to do because of the nature of the phone records, the DNA, and also we couldn't do it in linear fashion. Also, it's not like a straight line because we catching this murder, and we got other ones from behind that we're still trying to do work on. You know what I mean? And that doesn't make us particularly notable or exceptional. That was Area 4 at the time, and Area 1. I mean, right. Area 2. These, which are detective areas in the city. I mean, busy, a lot going on, and everybody's kind of doing the same things. Now, this case became notable to us and other people just because it became like a running joke. In Area 4, like, what do you got going? Or who we bring somebody in. Who's that? Just our other detectives. This is the way everybody's trying to help each other out, work on things together. And you bring somebody in. Who's that on? I would say on the Polish girl. They're like, still?
Yeah.
Oh, man, how long goes that?
Well, actually, in a roll call, when we show up to work, and the lieutenant or the sergeant would conduct a small roll call where what happened previous shift and everything. But then he would ask you, what are you guys working on? Hammond, Pietryla, what are you guys working on? Polish murder. And then you would just get the look like, it's been 6 months,
Sometimes,
you still.
Sometimes the sergeants say, so you got nothing.
So you got nothing.
Like you're available,
yeah.
Right? That's what they would say, you know what I mean? Or they'd say, look, all right, so Hammond, Pietryla, Manto, Tank Commander, you guys are all still in the Polish School, like 3 years ago. Like, so you're telling me you're available. Something comes in.
And which means
you're catching more.
You got this murder.
Right,
Here,
right,
this one just came in. You got it.
Yeah. So.
And that takes away from continuing to do what we do on any particular murder. This one we're still working on every day if we can. But if you come in and some 6-year-old little boy gets caught with a bullet in him, you're going.
Right.
And that was the great thing about Area 4, though. And if you have a murder, a whole bunch of us put our stuff on hold and we all went.
Right. I mean, it's just, if you think about it, it's fucking brutal. The only thing that would stop you from continuing to work on this case is another murder. Another loss of life. Which
that's it.
Yeah.
So
you're slowly moving forward, slowly eliminating DNA. You're working on the phone numbers. Something has to break in order for you guys to progress further. What is it?
Well, the break came with phone records, right? In that we were looking for. First of all, there were a couple things with those phone records that struck us. There at that time, some of our Chicago listeners remember, and across the country, we had these Cubs Foods grocery stores. They're now defunct, but
I do remember.
We had about 5 of them or 6 of them in the city of Chicago. And this...
It was like the precursor to like Costco.
Yeah, it was kind of,
It was more of a grocery store.
Right.
You know what I mean? More like a kind of...
Yeah, they didn't sell furniture or anything. Costco sells just about everything.
Yeah. But that we knew that that there had... That burnout phone had called multiple Cubs food stores multiple times, which was an odd thing. So it made us think, well, maybe it works there, you know, whatever. And that was, we're a little slow to address that because once again, you might walk right in and be talking to the killer. And now you'd like to be ahead of that game if you can, right? So, and then the other thing with it was there was multiple calls to a woman. Her name was Hale, and around that same time period, and we could not find her. But in our head, we thought this is somebody that knows this woman because of the multitude of calls to her. And there were calls to a couple of different multiple calls to a couple of different homes on the West Side. And that's how we got our break, right? We finally decided that we have not been able to find this Hale woman. But we realized she had a sister who had been arrested multiple times. The Hale woman we were looking for had never been arrested. But she had a sister who'd been arrested multiple times. And one of the arrests, she had used her sister's name, the sister we were looking for. So, and this all happens like within 48 hours, all of this, after years. We go to the Hale that we're not particularly interested in, but just to see. And with the idea of telling her, kind of giving her the impression that we know she had the phone, a little bit of kind of bad cop thing. Like, we know you had this phone. Who you? But we didn't even have to do that because we went to her and we found her, and she's like, oh, no, you're looking for my sister, right? Which was true. And, I used her name, I think, one time. But she goes, she moved to, what was it, Mississippi or something? And we're like, oh, shit. That explains why we can't find her.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well,
she's not showing up here or anywhere.
Do you know where she's at in Mississippi, where we can find her? She goes, I think I have her address, but she's in Chicago right now. We're like, she is, huh? She goes, yeah, you want me to take you to her? That'd be great. You know what I mean? And sure enough, she was staying over off, like, what was that, Central Park in Lexington?
What was on the West Side, but I don't know.
So we go and that's where we get the break. That's where it starts. She says, no, I don't remember the number, but I was dating a guy that I worked with at Cubs Foods at the time. Like,
and that's when the bells went off in our head.
Yeah, even us, like me, a slow Hoosier, and Mike with all
and the team commander, we had to explain it to him.
Right? We were like, oh,
this is important.
Big smiles on our face, subtle but big.
Yeah.
So then we go to Cubs Foods, then located at Cicero and North Avenue in Chicago's West Side. We talked to the manager there, and he says, oh, I remember her. I know who you're talking about. He goes, he doesn't work here anymore. I'm like, do you have any contact information? He says, I don't know, but I can tell you he's working still for our Cubs Foods in Joliet, right? And again, this is in a very short time period. Within a day or so, all of this occurs. We're like, okay, cool. And he only remembered his nickname, but he goes, he's there. The manager there can tell you, right? So I think it was Tank Commander and I.
And I know you guys went because I didn't want to go.
On the way, though, there's a house that had received multiple calls on the 4700 block of West End Avenue in Chicago. It's actually called West. It's West End. And so we stopped by that house and we tried to run this game on him. Like, hey, we're looking for, this old woman had her purse stolen, her identity theft stolen. We're trying to help her.
Which was all true.
It was true. But the woman was like, first of all, that house, we had run it. There had been like 15 people different arrested in that house. It was a kind of a house of ill repute, for lack of it, but not a house of prostitution, but a lot of bad activity going in and out of that house. And the woman who answered the door was a little bit older, and she wasn't buying our story at all. She's like, no, I don't know anybody. I don't know that phone. I don't know anybody who works at Cubs Foods. I don't know anybody. Like, all right, thank you very much for your time. See you around. We don't want to push it because we're trying to stick with our lame ass, story. So then we start driving to Joliet to the Cubs Foods, right? On the way there, I get a call from a guy that I worked with years before in a citywide gang unit who I knew well. And he goes, hey, Mike, were you just at a house at 4700 Superior asking about a murder? And I said, well, buddy, I was at that house, but I didn't say anything about a murder. And he said, well, okay. He said, just so you're aware, I have an informant over there. So if you need anything, let me know. They called me and said you'd come. You must not fool them. I said, yeah, but I don't think we fooled them. He goes, but if you need anything, I can reach out for my informant. I said, all right, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate that. Now, courtesy is you get a call from somebody like that, and you don't ask who the informant is, unless it becomes necessary, right? And so I didn't. I just said, hey, thanks a lot. I will call you if it comes up, right? So we go to the Cubs Foods in Joliet, the tank commander and I, and the manager at that Cubs Foods couldn't have been more perfect. He's like a junior G-man detective guy, watch detective shows, and he's just like, oh, yeah, what do we got? You know what I mean? And I said, here's what we're looking at. He goes, here's your guy. I know what you're talking about. And I said, do you have any emergency contact for him? And he goes, or contact information? He wasn't working that day. And he goes, sure. His emergency contact was the woman and the house on Superior, right, that we just left. So we get back in the car, I'm driving back. I get on the phone, I call my buddy who had called me, the informant, and I said, hey, I got a question. I wouldn't ask this normally, but I just need to know. Is this your informant's name? And he says, how'd you know that? So there you go. Episode 1 of the case of Magdalena Idzikowska. I hope you're finding it interesting. I have some quick notes here to pick up on. One, so it wasn't just Mike Pietryla and I, to be fair with this. We had the tank commander who we reference here, and he's still working, so I'm not going to use his name. Eventually he will retire, and hopefully I'll have him on this show. He's another fascinating guy. It's also another Vietnam vet, decorated Chicago policeman, long time. And then the fourth guy involved this heavily from kind of start to finish was my old partner, Sam Manto. Sam, another guy, served his country, retired colonel with the U.S. Army, retired lieutenant from Chicago Police Department. Sam, great policeman, great guy, served our country. He's just a great American. And one of these days, I'll have him on to talk as well. Sam was often, throughout my career, we worked together a multitude of times in patrol, in units, and then as detectives. But Sam was always serving our country as well. He got deployed several times throughout our time on the Chicago Police Department, to Bosnia and to the Middle East, and just, again, a great patriot, great American. So I want to mention those guys. They played an integral part of this case as well. So we're getting into the meat of this case now. Episode 2 will kind of wrap up for you here. Again, I hope you're enjoying it. Please like and subscribe and give us a download and reviews. Any questions you have, anything that's not answered here you're curious about, please reach out. I enjoy the interaction. Again, the best way to get me is my email, mike@detectivestory.net, detective story, one word, mike@detectivestory.net. I'm always happy to hear from you. So that's it for today. Thank you very much. Again, really appreciate your support, and I will talk to you again. Until then, please take care of yourself, stay safe, and watch out for each other. Thanks again.